The Zephyrian fleet began its withdrawal from human space within hours of Morrison's victory. Massive warships that had seemed unstoppable just days before now powered down their weapons and turned away from Earth's colonies, the site of alien vessels retreating sent waves of celebration across every human world. Though few people understood exactly how their salvation had been achieved, Morrison stood in the medical bay of a Zephyrian transport ship, watching through the viewport as the enemy fleet prepared to depart. His injuries had been treated with alien medical technology that seemed almost miraculous by human standards. The burns on his arm had been healed completely, leaving only faint scars as evidence of his ordeal in the arena. War-Chief Vextara entered the medical bay slowly, his own wounds bandaged but healing rapidly thanks to Zephyrian medicine. The massive alien warrior looked different somehow, as if losing his first battle had changed something fundamental about his worldview. "Your transport shuttle has arrived," Vextara announced. "Sergeant Ross is waiting to take you back to your fleet. I wanted to speak with you before you departed." Morrison turned from the viewport to face his former opponent. Despite everything that had happened, he felt no hostility toward the alien commander. They had been enemies for a brief time, but the arena had forged a strange kind of respect between them. "I have been thinking about our battle," Vextara continued. "For 50 years I have dominated every opponent through superior strength and technology. I never learned to adapt because I never needed to. Your victory taught me something important about the nature of warfare." Morrison nodded. "Sometimes the strongest fighter is not the one who wins. Sometimes it is the one who refuses to fight the way their enemy expects." "Precisely," Vextara agreed. "Your species has survived and thrived despite being outmatched by nearly every other race in the galaxy. I begin to understand why that is." The war chief moved to the viewport and gazed out at his departing fleet. Thousands of ships that had been prepared to eliminate humanity forever were now returning to Zephyrian space, their mission abandoned because of a single human's courage. "I must warn you about what is coming," Vextara said quietly. "The Zephyrian Empire is not the only threat your species will face. There are others out there, races that do not follow codes of honor or respect ancient laws. They will come for humanity eventually." Morrison joined him at the viewport. "What kind of others?" "The Vorth collective values only efficiency and conquest. They convert entire species into cybernetic slaves. The Nightmare Swarm devours all biological life in their path. The Shadow Imperium manipulates reality itself as a weapon. Any of these would destroy your people without hesitation." The alien commander turned to face Morrison directly. "But after fighting you, I believe your species has something that might allow you to survive even these threats. You have the ability to do the impossible when survival is at stake." Morrison considered this soberly. Humanity had won a great victory today, but it sounded like their real challenges were still ahead. "How long do we have before these other threats arrive?" "Years, perhaps decades," Vextara replied. "The galaxy is vast, and they are occupied with other conquests for now. But they will notice humanity eventually, especially if your species continues to expand into new territories." A Zephyrian aide entered the medical bay and spoke briefly with Vextara in their clicking language. The war chief nodded and turned back to Morrison. "Your shuttle is ready for departure. Before you go, I have something for you." Vextara handed Morrison a small device that looked like a combination communicator and data storage unit. The alien technology hummed with barely contained energy. "This contains detailed information about the other threats I mentioned," Vextara explained. "Ship designs, tactical capabilities, known weaknesses. It also includes a communication frequency that will reach me personally if your people ever need to contact the Zephyrian Empire." Morrison accepted the device carefully. "Why are you helping us?" "A few hours ago, you were trying to conquer humanity." "Because you showed me mercy when you could have claimed total victory," Vextara replied. "Because you fought with honor even while using dishonorable tactics. Because any species that produces warriors like you deserves a chance to survive." Morrison secured the alien device in his equipment pack. The information it contained might prove invaluable if humanity faced new threats in the future. But more importantly, it represented something he had never expected to gain from this mission, a potential ally among the stars. "There is one more thing," Vextara continued. "Some of my younger officers have requested permission to study human combat techniques. They are fascinated by your unconventional methods and wish to incorporate them into their own training." Morrison smiled grimly. "Humans have been teaching each other how to fight dirty for thousands of years. We would be happy to share our knowledge with warriors who appreciate it." The two former enemies walked together toward the shuttle bay where Sergeant Ross was waiting. The young pilot looked relieved to see Morrison alive and relatively unhurt. She had spent the last several hours wondering if she would be returning to the fleet alone. "Colonel," Ross said as Morrison approached, "Admiral Hayes is going to want a full report. The entire fleet is celebrating, but nobody knows exactly what happened down there." Morrison climbed into the shuttle and secured his equipment. Through the viewport, he could see Zephyrian warriors preparing their ships for the long journey home. The invasion that had seemed unstoppable just days ago was already becoming history. "Tell the Admiral that humanity learned something important today," Morrison said as Ross began her pre-flight sequence. "We learned that sometimes the most impossible missions succeed not because of superior technology or brilliant strategy, but because someone is willing to take that first step into the unknown." The shuttle detached from the Zephyrian transport and began its journey back to the USS Defiance. Behind them, the alien fleet continued its withdrawal, their massive ships disappearing into hyperspace one by one. The immediate threat to humanity had passed, but Morrison knew that greater challenges lay ahead. As Earth came into view on the shuttle's navigation display, Morrison thought about his daughter Julie. She was probably watching the news reports about humanity's unexpected victory, wondering how such a thing had been possible. Someday he would tell her the whole story, about walking alone into an enemy camp and facing an opponent who seemed unbeatable, but for now it was enough that she would grow up in a universe where humanity had proven it could survive against impossible odds. Morrison had given his species something precious, time to prepare for whatever came next. The shuttle docked with the Defiance to cheers from the crew. Admiral Hayes was waiting in the shuttle bay, her face showing a mixture of relief and disbelief. Behind her stood Lieutenant Carter and Dr. Park, both eager to hear how Morrison had accomplished the impossible. "Jake," Hayes said as Morrison emerged from the shuttle, "you actually did it. The aliens are withdrawing. The war is over." Morrison nodded wearily. "This war is over, Admiral. But I have a feeling our real challenges are just beginning." He handed her the device Vextara had given him. "We need to start preparing for what comes next. The galaxy is a more dangerous place than we imagined." As the crew celebrated around him, Morrison quietly made his way to his quarters. He had a letter to finish writing to his daughter and a promise to keep. No matter what new threats emerged from the depths of space, humanity would face them the same way they always had, by walking forward when everyone else would run away. The universe had learned something important about humans today. They were a species that refused to accept defeat even when logic said they should, and sometimes that was enough to change everything. Morrison stood over the fallen war chief with his blade pressed against the alien's throat. Purple blood flowed from Vexthara's chest wound, staining the ancient arena stones that had witnessed countless battles over the centuries. The massive Zephyrian warrior looked up at his human opponent with eyes that held shock, pain, and something that might have been respect. The arena had fallen completely silent. Thousands of alien warriors stared down at a scene they had never imagined possible. Their greatest champion, the warrior who had never known defeat, knelt bleeding before a small human who should have died in the first seconds of combat. The natural order of their universe had been turned upside down. Vexthara's breathing was labored but steady. Morrison's blade had found its mark, piercing the alien's primary heart. But Zephyrians possessed redundant cardiovascular systems that kept them alive even after critical injuries. The war chief would survive if he received medical attention soon, but tradition demanded that Morrison finish what he had started. "You have won, human," Vexthara said quietly, his voice carrying across the silent arena. By the laws of our people and the honor of single combat, you have earned the right to claim victory. Strike the killing blow and end this battle. Morrison's hand trembled slightly as he held the blade steady. Everything he had worked for, everything humanity needed, depended on completing this moment. According to Zephyrian law, only the death of their champion would force the fleet to withdraw from human space. One simple movement would save billions of lives and secure humanity's future. But something held Morrison back. He looked down at Vexthara and saw not a monster or an enemy, but a fellow warrior who had fought with honor according to his own code. The alien had accepted Morrison's challenge when he could have simply ordered his execution. He had fought fairly within the bounds of their combat laws, using no tricks or advantages beyond his natural abilities. Morrison slowly lowered his blade and stepped backward. The gesture sent shock waves through the watching crowd. Several Zephyrian warriors roared in confusion and anger. Others simply stared in disbelief at this unprecedented turn of events. "Why do you hesitate?" Vexthara asked, genuine puzzlement in his voice. "You have defeated me in honorable combat. The victory is yours by right. Complete what you have begun." Morrison sheathed his blade and extended his hand toward the fallen war chief. "Because humans believe that a worthy opponent deserves respect, not death. You fought with honor. You accepted my challenge when you could have refused. That makes you worthy of mercy." The offer of help shocked the assembled Zephyrians even more than Morrison's victory. Mercy to a defeated enemy was not part of their culture. The strong dominated the weak, and the victorious destroyed the vanquished. The idea of helping a fallen opponent seemed alien to their entire worldview. Vexthara stared at Morrison's outstretched hand for a long moment. Then slowly he reached up and grasped the human's wrist with one of his massive claws. Morrison helped pull the 9-foot alien to his feet, supporting his weight as Vexthara struggled to remain upright despite his injuries. "I do not understand." "Your people," Vexthara said as Morrison helped steady him. "You fight like demons when cornered, but show mercy when you could claim total victory. Your species makes no sense according to any logical pattern of behavior," Morrison smiled grimly. "We have been surprising people for thousands of years. It is what we do best." Commander Zarthik, Vexthara's second-in-command, pushed through the crowd of watching warriors. His 4 eyes blazed with fury as he pointed at Morrison with one of his secondary arms. "This is unacceptable," Zarthik declared. "The human used dishonorable tactics throughout the battle. He fought like a coward, hiding and using tricks instead of meeting our champion in direct combat. Such methods void any claim to victory." Sub-Commander Clixandra stepped forward to face her superior officer. "The human fought within the boundaries of our combat laws. He used no forbidden weapons and broke no established rules. That his methods were unconventional does not make them invalid." The argument that followed revealed deep divisions within the Zephyrian command structure. The older, more traditional officers agreed with Zarthik that Morrison's fighting style was too dishonorable to be recognized. But younger warriors who had watched the battle with growing fascination argued that Morrison had simply used superior tactics to overcome natural disadvantages. Vexthara raised one of his arms for silence. Despite his injuries, his voice still carried the absolute authority of supreme command. "The human fought according to our laws," the war chief announced. "He used the weapons permitted to him and stayed within the bounds of honorable combat. That his methods were different from ours does not invalidate his victory. I have been defeated in fair battle." Morrison looked around at the thousands of alien faces staring down at him. Some showed anger and resentment at this impossible outcome. Others displayed curiosity about the small human who had accomplished the unthinkable. A few even seemed to show something like admiration for his courage and skill. "According to your ancient laws," Morrison said, using the translator to ensure. His words were understood by all. "My victory means the immediate withdrawal of all Zephyrian forces from human space. The war between our peoples is over." Zarthik started to protest again, but Vexthara silenced him with a gesture. The war chief's honor was at stake, and no amount of political maneuvering could change the outcome of single combat witnessed by thousands of warriors. "The human speaks truth," Vexthara declared. "By defeating me in ritual combat, he has earned victory for his entire species. We will withdraw our fleet from human territory immediately and return to our own space." The crowd erupted in confused voices as the implications sank in. Their invasion had been stopped by a single human warrior armed with primitive weapons. Decades of planning and preparation had been undone by one man's refusal to accept the impossible. Morrison swayed slightly as adrenaline began to fade and his injuries made themselves known. The burns on his arm throbbed with every heartbeat, and he could feel warm blood soaking through his damaged armor. But he had done what he came to do. Humanity would survive. Zephyrian medics arrived to treat both warriors. They worked on Vexthara first, sealing his wounds with devices that seemed to repair tissue at the cellular level. When they turned to Morrison, he was surprised by their gentle efficiency. Even defeated, the aliens honored their obligations. To a worthy opponent. As Morrison's injuries were being treated, Vexthara approached him slowly. The war chief's natural armor bore fresh scars from their battle, permanent reminders of the day he met his match against an enemy he had underestimated. "Human," Vexthara said quietly, "before we part, I must ask you something. Your species is weaker than ours in every measurable way. You're smaller, slower, more fragile, yet you fight with a ferocity that defies logic. What drives you to such desperate measures?" Morrison considered the question carefully. Around them, Zephyrian warriors were beginning to prepare for withdrawal, their invasion plans abandoned in the face of an outcome none of them had anticipated. "We fight because we refuse to give up," Morrison finally replied. "When everything seems hopeless, when logic says we should surrender, humans find a way to keep going. It is not about being stronger or faster. It is about being too stubborn to quit." Vexthara nodded slowly, as if this explanation confirmed something he had suspected. "Other species will come after us, human. Races far more ruthless than the honor-bound Zephyrians. They will not be stopped by single combat or ancient laws." Morrison met the alien's gaze steadily. "Then we will find new ways to surprise them. We always do." The combat arena had been carved from living rock centuries ago, a circular pit 30 meters across with steep walls that prevented escape. Thousands of Zephyrian warriors gathered around the rim, their excited voices creating a low rumble that seemed to make the ground vibrate. They had come to witness their war chief destroy the foolish human who dared challenge their greatest warrior. Morrison descended into the arena, carrying his primitive weapons and wearing armor that looked like toys compared to the alien technology. Surrounding him, his sidearm felt heavy at his hip, though he knew it would be useless against Zephyrian energy shields. The ceremonial blade at his back represented his only real chance if he could somehow get close enough to use it. War Chief Vexthara entered from the opposite side of the arena to thunderous cheers from the watching crowd. His ceremonial combat gear gleamed like liquid metal, each piece crafted from materials that could withstand plasma fire and kinetic impacts that would shatter human bones. He carried a plasma lance that hummed with deadly energy and energy shields that flickered around his massive frame like protective lightning. The two opponents faced each other across the arena floor. Morrison looked tiny compared to the 9-foot alien warrior, like a child preparing to fight an adult. But something in the human's eyes made Vexthara pause. There was no fear there, no resignation to inevitable defeat. Instead, Morrison's gaze held the cold calculation of someone who had already accepted death and was now focused entirely on taking his enemy with him. The ritual combat began with the sound of a massive gong that echoed off the arena walls. Vexthara immediately raised his plasma lance and sent a bolt of superheated energy screaming toward Morrison's position. The human threw himself sideways, the plasma blast missing him by inches and leaving a smoking crater in the rock where he had been standing. Morrison rolled to his feet and drew his sidearm, firing rapidly at the war chief's center mass. The bullet struck Vexthara's energy shields and simply vanished, absorbed by technology that humans could barely understand. The alien warrior laughed and fired again, forcing Morrison to dive behind one of the carved pillars that decorated the arena. For the first 10 minutes, Morrison did nothing but run and hide. Vexthara's plasma lance turned the arena into a battlefield of smoking craters and melted rock. The human seemed completely outmatched, unable to even get close enough to threaten his opponent. The watching crowd began to jeer, disappointed by how brief the contest was proving to be, but Morrison was not panicking. He was learning. Every shot Vexthara fired taught him something about the alien's targeting systems and reaction time. Every movement revealed details about how the war chief fought, what patterns he followed, what weaknesses he might possess. Morrison noticed that the alien favored his left side slightly, compensating for what might be an old injury. Morrison abandoned his useless sidearm and drew his ceremonial blade. The crowd roared with laughter at the sight of a human with a primitive steel weapon facing an opponent armed with technology that could melt mountains. But Morrison ignored their mockery and began moving differently, using the arena's terrain in ways that confused Vexthara's targeting systems. The human started using elevation changes and carved decorations to break up his movement patterns. He would disappear behind a pillar, emerge from an unexpected angle, and force Vexthara to adjust his aim constantly. The war chief's shots became less accurate as he grew frustrated with his opponent's refusal to stand still and die properly. Morrison's breakthrough came when he deliberately took a glancing hit from the plasma lance. The energy burst destroyed most of his left shoulder armor and left burns across his arm, but it also allowed him to get inside Vexthara's guard while the alien was cycling his weapon for the next shot. Morrison's blade found the gap between armor plates at the war chief's left knee. Drawing first blood, the arena fell completely silent as purple ichor dripped onto the arena floor. In over 50 years of command, Vexthara had never been wounded in single combat. The watching Zephyrian warriors stared in shock as their invincible champion looked down at the cut on his leg with something approaching disbelief. Morrison rolled away before Vexthara could grab him, but the psychological damage was already done. The war chief's absolute confidence had been shaken. For the first time in decades, he was facing an opponent who might actually be dangerous. The battle's pace changed completely. Vexthara became more cautious, no longer treating Morrison like easy prey. The human used this hesitation to his advantage, pressing attacks that forced the alien to react defensively. Morrison's blade work was unlike anything the Zephyrians had ever seen, incorporating moves borrowed from human martial arts that had evolved over thousands of years of warfare. Morrison started using techniques that no honorable warrior would ever consider. When Vexthara expected a frontal assault, Morrison attacked from behind. When the alien braced for a blade strike, Morrison used his fists and feet. He threw sand in Vexthara's eyes, used the arena's shadows to mask his position, and exploited every dirty trick he could think of. The watching Zephyrians began to murmur among themselves in confusion and growing unease. They had never seen anything like Morrison's fighting style. It was chaotic, unpredictable, and brutally effective. Some of the younger warriors leaned forward with interest, while the older veterans frowned in disapproval at such dishonorable tactics. Vexthara found himself genuinely challenged for the first time in his career. The human's refusal to follow conventional combat doctrine forced the war chief to think creatively, something his rigid military training had never prepared him for. Morrison's attacks came from impossible angles using combinations that made no tactical sense but somehow worked. The turning point came when Morrison managed to damage one of Vexthara's energy shields. The human had noticed that the protective barrier flickered slightly when the war chief moved his upper right arm in certain ways. Morrison timed his attack perfectly, striking the shield generator just as it cycled through a vulnerable moment in its power sequence. Sparks flew from the damaged equipment, and suddenly Vexthara's left side was partially exposed. Morrison pressed his advantage immediately, his blade seeking every gap in the alien's natural armor. The war chief's purple blood began to flow more freely as the human found weak points that had never been tested in real combat, but Vexthara was far from finished. Even wounded and partially unshielded, he remained one of the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy. His plasma lance sent waves of superheated energy across the arena, forcing Morrison to constant movement to avoid being incinerated. The alien's forearms moved in perfect coordination, turning him into a living weapon that could attack from multiple angles. Simultaneously, Morrison's own injuries were mounting. His armor was mostly destroyed, his body covered with burns and cuts from near misses with alien weapons. But something kept him moving, some deep well of determination that refused to accept defeat even against impossible odds. The battle reached its climax, when both warriors launched simultaneous attacks. Morrison's blade pierced Vexthara's primary heart, while the alien's claws tore through Morrison's chest armor and into his ribcage. Both combatants staggered backward, their blood mixing on the ancient stone floor. For a moment neither warrior moved. The arena held its breath as two champions stood locked in mortal combat, each waiting to see who would fall first. Morrison's vision blurred from blood loss, but he forced himself to remain standing. Across from him, Vexthara swayed slightly, purple ichor flowing from the wound in his chest. Then Morrison took a step forward, his blade still ready despite his injuries. Vexthara tried to match him but stumbled, his massive frame no longer responding properly to his commands. The war chief's weapon fell from nerveless fingers as he dropped to one knee. Morrison stood over his fallen opponent, blade at Vexthara's throat, ready to deliver the killing blow that would end the most important duel in human history. The shuttle touched down on the dark side of Titan 7 with barely a whisper. Sergeant Ross had managed to land in a crater that hid them from the Zephyrian sensors, but Morrison knew their luck would not last long. The aliens had patrol ships, sweeping the area constantly, and it was only a matter of time before something detected their presence. Morrison checked his equipment one final time. The ceremonial blade hung at his side, looking ancient compared to the alien technology he was about to face. His sidearm felt equally primitive, but it was all he was allowed under Zephyrian combat law. A translator device hummed quietly against his chest, ready to convert his words into the clicking, growling sounds of the alien language. "This is it," Ross said as she prepared to seal the airlock. "The enemy camp is 2 kilometers northeast. Follow the ridgeline and you cannot miss it. The place is lit up like a city." Morrison sealed his helmet and checked his air supply. He had enough oxygen for 6 hours, more than enough time to reach the alien fortress and issue his challenge. Whether he would live long enough to need more air was another question entirely. "Give me 30 minutes to get clear, then get back to the fleet," Morrison ordered. "If this goes wrong, Admiral Hayes will need every ship we have for the final battle." Ross nodded and opened the airlock. Morrison stepped out onto the surface of the alien moon and immediately felt the crushing weight of what he was attempting. The landscape stretched out before him like something from a nightmare, all sharp rocks and deep shadows under the light of distant stars. He began walking toward the Zephyrian camp, his boots crunching softly on the frozen ground. Each step took him closer to an enemy that had never known defeat. Behind him, the shuttle's engines whispered to life and Ross lifted off, disappearing into the darkness and leaving Morrison completely alone. The alien fortress became visible long before Morrison reached the perimeter. It rose from the surface of the moon like a metallic mountain, its towers and weapons platforms gleaming under powerful floodlights. Ships moved around it constantly, patrol craft that could vaporize Morrison with a single blast from their plasma cannons. Morrison kept walking. His heart hammered against his ribs, but his pace never faltered. He had made his choice back on the Defiance, and now there was nothing to do but see it through to the end. The ridgeline Ross had mentioned provided some cover, but Morrison knew the aliens would spot him soon enough. The first searchlight found him when he was still half a kilometer from their perimeter. The brilliant white beam swept across the landscape and locked onto the lone human figure walking steadily toward their fortress. Alarms began wailing in the distance, and Morrison could see alien warriors emerging from defensive positions. More searchlights joined the first, creating a web of brilliant illumination that turned night into day. Morrison raised his hands to show they were empty and continued walking forward. The Zephyrian sentries trained their weapons on him, but something held them back from firing immediately. Morrison reached the challenge, circled just as the alien camp erupted into chaos. The ring of carved stones marked neutral ground according to their ancient customs, and even the most aggressive Zephyrian warrior would hesitate before violating such sacred space. Morrison stopped in the center of the circle and removed his helmet, exposing his face to the thin atmosphere. The translator device activated automatically as Morrison spoke the ritual words Dr. Park had taught him. The sounds that emerged were barely recognizable as coming from a human throat, full of clicks and growls that seemed to echo across the battlefield. But the meaning was clear to every alien warrior within hearing range. "I am Colonel Jake Morrison, of the human military forces," the translated voice announced. "I invoke the right of champions and challenge War Chief Vexthara to single combat according to the ancient laws. Let this battle determine the fate of our peoples." The alien camp fell silent. In over 1,000 years of Zephyrian military history, no enemy had ever approached their fortress alone to issue a formal challenge. The warriors who had emerged to investigate the disturbance stared at Morrison in shock and confusion. War Chief Vexthara emerged from the central command structure like something from humanity's worst nightmares. He stood nearly 9 feet tall, his natural armor scarred from countless battles. 4 massive arms ended in claws that could tear through steel plates. His 4 eyes studied Morrison with the calculating gaze of a predator examining prey. The war chief approached the challenge. Circle slowly, flanked by his elite guard. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of absolute command and the confidence of someone who had never lost a battle. "I am Vexthara, war chief of the 7th Assault Fleet and champion of the Zephyrian Empire," he announced in perfect English. "You are a human. Your species is weak and slow and fragile. Why do you seek death so eagerly when it will come to you soon enough?" Morrison stood straighter and met the alien's gaze without flinching. "I seek to end this war through honorable combat. My people and yours have spilled enough blood. Let the strongest warrior decide the outcome." Vexthara laughed, a sound like grinding metal that echoed off the fortress walls. "Human, I have killed over 300 opponents in single combat. I have never faced an enemy who lasted more than a few minutes against me. Your largest warriors are smaller than our younglings. What makes you think you can succeed where your entire fleet has failed?" Morrison drew his ceremonial blade, the steel gleaming under the alien floodlights. "Because humans fight differently than anyone you have ever faced. We do not fight fair. We do not fight with honor, we fight to win." The war chief's advisors whispered among themselves in their clicking language. Commander Zarthik, Vexthara's second-in-command, argued that they should simply execute the human and continue with their original plan. But Sub-Commander Clixandra pointed out that refusing a properly invoked challenge would bring dishonor upon their entire clan. Vexthara studied Morrison for a long moment. Despite himself, the alien warrior felt a grudging respect for the human's courage. It took remarkable bravery to walk alone into an enemy camp and challenge their greatest warrior to mortal combat, even if the challenge was ultimately futile. It showed a kind of strength that Vexthara could appreciate. "You have invoked the right of champions according to our ancient laws," Vexthara finally announced. "By the honor of my clan and the traditions of our people, I accept your challenge. We will fight at dawn using the weapons and rules established by our ancestors." The alien crowd roared approval. They had expected to crush the human fleet through overwhelming firepower, but this promised to be far more entertaining. Their war chief had never lost a battle, and watching him destroy the human champion would be a fitting end to their conquest. Morrison was escorted to a holding area under heavy guard. The aliens provided him with water and basic food, showing the minimal courtesy required for a challenge participant. But their eyes held no doubt about the outcome. By tomorrow, the human would be dead and their invasion could continue. Morrison spent the night preparing mentally for a battle he could not possibly win through conventional means. He reviewed everything he knew about Zephyrian physiology and combat techniques. Their natural armor was strongest on the front and sides, weaker at the joints and back. Their four-armed fighting style was devastating but required precise coordination. That might be disrupted by unexpected attacks. As dawn approached, Morrison realized that his only chance lay in doing exactly what he had told Vexthara. He would have to fight dirty, using tactics that no honorable Zephyrian would ever consider. He would have to be faster, smarter, and more vicious than an opponent who was superior to him in every physical category. The sun rose over Titan 7, and with it came the most important battle in human history. Morrison strapped on his primitive armor and checked his weapons one final time. In a few minutes he would face the greatest warrior the Zephyrian Empire had ever produced. He walked toward the combat arena knowing that humanity's survival depended on him doing the impossible. Morrison spent the next 18 hours preparing for a mission that everyone knew was suicide. He studied every piece of intelligence the human fleet had gathered about Zephyrian combat techniques over the years. The aliens fought with brutal efficiency, using their natural advantages to overwhelm opponents before they could adapt. Their 8-foot frames carried natural armor that could stop most human weapons. Their forearms moved with mechanical precision, never wasting motion or energy. The preparation room became Morrison's world as he memorized attack patterns and defensive strategies. Dr. Park had provided him with recordings of the few Zephyrian combat encounters that human forces had survived, long enough to document. Morrison watched the footage over and over, studying how the aliens moved, how they attacked, how they killed. Lieutenant Ben Carter found him there at 3 a.m, still watching the same combat sequences. Carter had been Morrison's student at the military academy 15 years ago. Now he served as the Defiance's tactical officer, and he could not stand watching his old instructor prepared to throw his life away. "Colonel, this is insane," Carter said as he sat down beside Morrison. "Those things are not just stronger than US, they are built for killing. Look at their claws. Look at how fast they move. You might as well challenge a hurricane to a single combat." Morrison paused the video and looked at his former student. "Then, do you remember what I taught you about impossible situations?" Carter sighed. "When conventional tactics fail, create new ones. But this is not about tactics, sir. This is about physics." "They are simply better than us in every measurable way." "That is exactly why this might work," Morrison replied. "They expect to fight someone who will try to match them strength for strength. They expect honorable combat using their rules. What they do not expect is someone who will break every rule they know." Morrison stood up and walked to the weapons locker. Inside were the only items he would be allowed to carry according to Zephyrian combat law. A standard human sidearm with 2 magazines. A ceremonial blade that looked primitive compared to alien plasma weapons. Body armor that seemed like paper against enemies who could punch through steel plates. "The translator device will let me speak their language properly," Morrison continued as he checked his equipment. "Dr. Park spent all day teaching me the ritual phrases I need to use. If I get even one word wrong, they will execute me on the spot instead of accepting the challenge." Carter watched Morrison examine the blade. It was a simple piece of human craftsmanship, steel folded and tempered using techniques that were thousands of years old. Against alien technology, it seemed laughably inadequate. "What if they just refuse the challenge?" Carter asked. "What if they decide that human customs do not matter to them?" Morrison sheathed the blade and secured it to his armor. "Then I die, and humanity still has 2 days to think of something else. But if they accept, and if I can somehow win, the war ends immediately. Their honor code requires it." Dr. Park entered the preparation room carrying a small device that looked like a combination translator and medical scanner. She had spent the last day modifying it to work with human vocal cords, allowing Morrison to speak Zephyrian with the proper tonal inflections their language required. "The challenge must be issued at their combat circle," Park explained as she helped Morrison attach the device to his armor. "It is a ring of carved stones that marks neutral ground according to their customs. You have to remove your helmet and speak the words exactly as I taught you. Any mistake will void the challenge." Morrison tested the device, speaking a few practice phrases in the alien language. The sounds that came out barely seemed human, full of clicks and growls that human throats were never meant to make. But the translator compensated for his limitations, ensuring that his meaning would be understood. "Remember," Park continued, "their war chief has the right to refuse if he considers you unworthy. You need to convince him that you represent humanity's best warrior. If he thinks you are just a sacrifice or a distraction, he will not honor the challenge." Morrison nodded and began putting on his combat armor. The standard marine equipment felt heavier than usual, knowing that it would provide almost no protection against alien weapons. But it was all he was allowed to carry under their combat laws. Admiral Hayes arrived as Morrison was making his final preparations. She carried a small recording device and looked like she had not slept in days. The weight of command had aged her visibly since the defeat at Kepler 442. "I need you to record a message," Hayes said quietly, "for your daughter just in case." Morrison took the device and held it for a moment. Julie was 17 years old, back on Earth, probably getting ready for her final year of school. She had no idea that her father was about to walk into an alien fortress alone with almost no chance of coming back alive. "Tell her I love her," Morrison said as he handed the device back. "Tell her that sometimes people have to do impossible things to protect the people they care about. Tell her that being brave does not mean you are not scared. It means you do what needs to be done even when you are terrified." Hayes nodded and secured the device. "The shuttle is ready. Sergeant, Amy Ross will pilot you to the drop point. She's the best stealth pilot we have." Morrison gathered his equipment and headed for the shuttle bay. Carter followed him, still trying to think of arguments that might change his mind. But Morrison had made his decision. In less than 6 hours, he would either be dead or facing the most dangerous opponent in the known galaxy. The shuttle bay was nearly empty. Most of the crew was at their battle stations, preparing for what everyone assumed would be humanity's final battle. Sergeant Ross was running through her pre-flight checks when Morrison arrived. She was young, maybe 25, with the steady hands and calm nerves that made her perfect for dangerous missions. "The cloak will get us past their sensors," Ross explained as Morrison secured his gear. "But once you are on the surface, you are on your own. I cannot wait around. If they detect the shuttle, the whole mission fails." Morrison strapped himself into the passenger seat. Through the shuttle's small viewport, he could see the stars wheeling slowly past as the Defiance continued its patrol pattern. Somewhere out there, the Zephyrian fleet was waiting with enough firepower to reduce every human world to radioactive ash. "How long until we reach the drop point?" Morrison asked. Ross checked her instruments. 43 minutes. "The moon has no atmosphere, so you will need to keep your helmet sealed until you reach their camp. Their atmospheric processors will provide breathable air inside the perimeter." The shuttle detached from the Defiance and began its silent journey toward Titan 7. Morrison watched his ship disappear into the darkness, knowing he might never see it again. In less than an hour, he would be walking across an alien landscape toward enemies who had never known defeat. Morrison closed his eyes and tried to focus on what he would need to do. Challenge the war chief properly using the ritual phrases. Survive long enough to prove he was a worthy opponent. Fight using every dirty trick and unconventional tactic he could think of. Win against impossible odds. "Colonel," Ross said quietly, "for what it is worth, I think you are either the bravest man alive or completely insane." Morrison opened his eyes and looked out at the approaching moon. "Probably both." The shuttle continued through space, carrying one man toward a confrontation that would determine the fate of humanity. Behind them, the human fleet waited in the darkness, hoping for a miracle that seemed impossible even by human standards. Morrison checked his weapons one final time and prepared to walk into the enemy camp alone. The lights on the bridge of the USS Defiance flickered as Admiral Karen Hayes stared at the damage reports scrolling across her screen. 3 days had passed since the battle at Kepler 442, and the numbers still made her sick. 37 human ships destroyed in less than 6 hours. 200,000 good men and women dead. The Zephyrian Empire had crushed the largest human fleet ever assembled like it was nothing more than space debris. Colonel Jake Morrison stood beside the holographic display showing the enemy positions. His weathered face looked tired, but his eyes burned with the same fire that had carried him through 20 years of combat. The aliens had taken position around Titan 7, turning the moon into a fortress that bristled with weapons capable of cracking planets in half. Every scan showed more ships arriving to join their fleet. They gave us 72 hours, Hayes said quietly, not looking away from her reports. Surrender or watch every human world burn. Morrison studied the tactical display. The Zephyrians had positioned their fleet perfectly. Any human ship that tried to approach would be torn apart long before it could fire a single shot. The aliens had learned from previous battles. They knew exactly how humans fought, and they had prepared for every possible attack. Dr. Lisa Park entered the bridge carrying a datapad filled with her latest research. The xenobiologist had spent the last 3 days studying every piece of Zephyrian technology they had captured over the years. Her findings painted a grim picture of an enemy that was not only stronger and faster than humans, but also followed a rigid code of honor that made them nearly impossible to negotiate with. Their society revolves around strength, Park explained, as she activated her presentation. They respect power above all else. Their military structure is built on single combat between champions. When two Zephyrian clans have a dispute, their best warriors fight to determine the winner. Hayes leaned forward in her chair. Has any human ever survived direct contact with their warrior caste? Park shook her head. The few encounters we have on record lasted less than 30 seconds. Their natural armor can stop our bullets. Their reflexes are 3 times faster than ours. They stand 8 feet tall and have 4 arms. Fighting one is like a child trying to wrestle a bear. Morrison continued staring at the display. Something in the back of his mind was working on a problem that seemed to have no solution. The human fleet was outnumbered 10 to 1. Conventional weapons barely scratched Zephyrian shields. Every military strategy they had tried over the years had failed completely. What about their leader? Morrison asked suddenly. This war chief. Vextara, what do we know about him? Park pulled up another file. He has commanded their forces for over 50 years. Never lost a battle. His personal combat record shows 300 victories in single combat. The Zephyrians consider him their greatest warrior since their empire began. The bridge fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. Hayes rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of command pressing down on her shoulders. In less than 3 days, she would have to choose between surrendering humanity to slavery or watching billions of innocent people die. In nuclear fire, Morrison turned away from the display and faced the admiral. I want to propose something. Hayes looked up at him with tired eyes. Unless you have a secret fleet hidden somewhere, I am not sure what options we have left. I want to challenge their war chief to single combat. The bridge erupted in shocked voices. Park dropped her datapad. Hayes stood up so quickly her chair rolled backward into the wall. Even the normally calm Lieutenant Ben Carter, Morrison's former student, stared at his old instructor like he had lost his mind. Jake, that is suicide, Hayes said flatly. You heard what Dr. Park just told us. No human has ever lasted 30 seconds against one of their warriors. Morrison remained calm. According to their honor code, if I challenge Vextara properly and win, they have to withdraw their entire fleet. It would be considered a binding defeat. Carter stepped forward. Colonel, with respect, you would not win. You would not even come close to winning. They would kill you in the first 5 seconds. Maybe, Morrison admitted, but if I do nothing, we all die anyway. At least this way we have a chance. Park picked up her datapad with shaking hands. Even if they accepted the challenge, which they probably would not, you would be fighting with primitive weapons against alien technology. Their plasma weapons can melt steel. Their energy shields can stop anything we can throw at them. Morrison walked over to the viewport and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, The Zephyrian fleet was preparing for the final assault that would end human civilization. His daughter was back on Earth, probably watching the news reports and wondering if her father was still alive. "I have been fighting for 20 years, Morrison said without turning around. "I have seen what humans can do when everything seems hopeless. We survive because we do things that seem impossible. We adapt. We improvise. We refuse to give up even when logic says we should." Hayes joined him at the viewport. "This is different, Jake. This is not about tactics or strategy. This is about biology. They are simply better than us in every way that matters for combat." Morrison finally turned to face her. "Then we fight dirty. We use our weaknesses as strengths. We do things they would never expect because they go against everything their honor code teaches them." The Admiral stared at him for a long moment. She had known Morrison for 15 years. He had never asked for an impossible mission he did not believe he could complete. But this was beyond impossible. This was asking a man to fight a god and expect to win. "How would you even get close to their camp?" Hayes asked. "Their sensors would detect any ship we send." "Small stealth shuttle," Morrison replied immediately. "Land on the dark side of the moon and walk in on foot. Challenge him, according to their own customs. Force them to honor their traditions." The bridge fell silent again as everyone considered the insane plan. It violated every principle of modern warfare. It threw away every advantage technology could provide. It was exactly the kind of desperate gamble that humans had been making. For thousands of years, when their backs were against the wall, Hayes looked around at her officers. They were all staring at Morrison with mixtures of admiration and horror. They knew he was serious. They also knew he was probably walking to his death. "If you lose," Hayes said quietly, "humanity dies anyway." Morrison nodded. "If I do nothing, humanity dies for certain. At least this way, we go down fighting."